Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and I really liked this game. Um, some games are below average, where I'm not that happy with how they turned out. Some are above average, and I felt like that's what this one was. Obviously, your mileage may vary. It might not be your cup of tea, but I really liked this one. Um, the reason I liked it was because we had so many different people contributing to this adventure, and everybody's kind of coming from a different angle, and everybody's generating ideas, and it can be a chaotic thing, but it can, when everything kind of comes into alignment, it can give you these scenarios that, at least for me, I have never seen in like a movie or a TV show or anything. It was just completely original. I mean, it's possible it's out there somewhere and I just haven't seen it. But at any rate, that's why I really liked this one, was because it was off the beaten path. At any rate, without any further ado, I'll stop talking about the game in that way and we'll actually get into the game itself. So the prologue to this one starts with Anastasia. I'm going to say a bunch of stuff and it's going to seem very unrelated and sort of disjointed, but then I'm going to bring it all together. Okay, so bear with me. Anastasia, for those who don't know, was the daughter of the Romanov family, who were the royal family of Russia back in the day. And the family was eliminated through violent means, right? But Anastasia survived and got away and grew up, and her daughter is Black Widow, right? And Black Widow, by the way, is way older than most people realize. Black Widow was doing stuff during World War II. There was a story I read one time where some bad guys wanted to sort of turn her into a living weapon uh, in service of their evil agenda. So Wolverine and Captain America, who were both alive in World War II, uh, bailed her out of that situation. Pretty cool stuff. But yeah, so Black Widow was fighting the Germans in World War II. Someone else in our game who was fighting the Germans in World War II was a guy named Red. And at the very, very end of the war, it was Red who came face to face with the evil leader of Germany. That guy, by the way, the villain, shows up in a lot of different comic book universes. So, like in DC Comics, he had his brain put into a Superman analog named Dynaman, and the Justice Society had to deal with him. In Marvel, though, he goes on to become this villain named Hate Monger. In Image, he fought the Savage Dragon. So, the problem with Earth K, which is our game world, is that Earth K is basically the setting where all crossovers take place, basically, right? So we had to come up with a way for all of these scenarios to all kind of happen simultaneously. So my solution to that was we gave the villain a duplicator ray. So the idea was, if he would shoot himself with this ray gun, it sort of works like on your computer when you copy and paste something. That's basically the setting of the gun, right? Is he'd point it at himself and hit copy, and then point at a different part of the room he's in and hit paste, and now there's two of them. And then those two can become four, and those four can become eight. They can be 16, and so on and so forth, right? So there was enough of that guy to for him to be appearing in all these stories, right? For him to be Dynaman, for him to be Hate Monger, so on and so forth. Well, during the struggle, Red gets hit by this duplicator ray. So there's a bunch of Reds too. One of them runs into Black Widow, and obviously Black Widow is, she's beautiful, she's intelligent, so on and so forth, right? So it's not hard to see why he falls in love with her. She actually falls in love with him too, which I don't want to spend too much time on this, but at that point in Red's life, he would sort of initially hook up with women, but it always ended somehow, right? Um Only at first glance does he seem to be kind of a ladies' man. In the long run, he actually has bad luck with women, but let's put a pin in that, okay? This one Red, though, of all these duplicates, things work out with Black Widow. And so much so that when the war ends, he would do anything for her. And when she goes back to Russia, he goes with her and they actually get married. And they're married throughout the 1950s. And I don't want to say happily married in the sense that like happily ever after because it's the USSR, right? And the USSR was horrible. Um, but in terms of their marriage, they loved each other though. Despite what was going on around them, they loved each other. They didn't have any kids, by the way, because they didn't want to bring kids into that world. And their thing was, we'll kind of wait until later because she really wants to have kids. Um, just not in the USSR. And by the way, with her, the theme of the USSR really, because a lot of people glance at her and go, oh, yeah, well, she's Russian or, whatever. Well, there's sort of two Russias, though, right? And she represents the old Russia, which is why I mentioned Anastasia earlier. But the Russia of the Silver Age is at odds with Black Widow. And not only this is another thing where it's kind of beyond the scope of this video, but I could do a whole video where we connect the people who killed the Romanov family, the royal family of Russia, where we connect them to the USSR, right? You can connect those dots. And certainly Marvel does. Um, and that's one of the reasons she's at odds with the USSR. Um, they also heavily imply that the USSR killed her parents, which again is this theme of the USSR taking her family from her. So now she's married, and you see where this is going. So at one point, there's this signal that the major countries of the world receive this signal from space. It teaches them how to do two things. The first is how to build a supercomputer that has the ability to upgrade your arsenal. So when you have missiles of a nuclear nature, right? The computer knows how to get a bigger bang out of them, literally. It knows how to make them go faster, just so on. Every metric you can think of there, the computer can always upgrade these things. But the thing is, all the other countries of the world have one of these computers now too, right? So the big secret there is that the aliens sent the signal to Earth hoping that humanity would get wiped out. So then the aliens can just come in and set up shop, right? So with the exception of Russia, all the other countries destroy their respective computer, right? Because they don't want situation kind of like Skynet from the Terminator movies. But the one who doesn't is the USSR. They keep their computer because they do want bigger, better, faster missiles to take out basically anybody who doesn't think like they do, right? So the Black Widow's husband, which they're on a team with other supers, the Black Widow's husband because they're working with the government, for the government, stuff like that. Not that they want to, right? But you have to. Because one of the people on that team was this character named Mother Russia. And Mother Russia, for those who are unfamiliar, her whole deal is like if you figured out how much the average person could bench press and you take that number and you multiply it times the number of people living in Russia, that's how much Mother Russia can bench press. And just so on and so forth. You add up the IQs of everybody in the country or whatever, that's her IQ. Like she's a ridiculous, super powerful character, and she's more powerful than everybody else on the team. And when someone gets out of line, she takes care of them. So with that said, when the USSR refuses to get rid of this computer, which is a threat to the entire human race, the Russian bear, Black Widow's husband, he destroys the computer. So the USSR has Mother Russia destroy him. So once again, we have this theme that anytime she has a family, the USSR takes that from her, right? Now, to make matters even worse, because she's not a super powerful, like cosmic being or anything, she can't really stand up to Mother Russia, the character. I mean both for that matter, but I was referring to the character specifically. So they throw her into this program against her will that gets mentioned and briefly shown and stuff in the Marvel movies, which is her training to become a Black Widow. And so then so this all sets up the current game. This is everything you need to know for the current game to kind of hold weight and make sense and all that. So at the beginning of the game, that when we get into the main plot of it, the USSR has learned of the existence of the Hellfire Club. And what the Hellfire Club is, well, like the Hellfire Club is kind of complicated because at different points in time, they have different members with different motivations and different goals, right? When the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, a lot of the members who were very evil were eliminated because they were kind of making that happen because they had hoped for there to be a bunch of radiation to cause mutations in the X-Men sense of mutants. Um, so the heroes in that adventure took out a bunch of the various members of the Hellfire Club. But the USSR doesn't know that. They only know that somebody from the Hellfire Club was manipulating various generals and stuff like that to do stuff like have missiles put in Turkey and you know what I mean? So when Russia kind of figures out that, because there was a psychic named Mastermind who was a member of the Hellfire Club and he was doing that. So when the USSR finds out about this, they're pretty upset that they're being manipulated, right? And they're very upset by the idea because what's implied with the Hellfire Club is that they're playing chess using the nations of the world, right? So Russia doesn't want to be a pawn, they want to be the king. So they decide, because the Hellfire Club's whole thing is kind of hedonism and pretty girls wearing, classic Hellfire Club outfit is like the corset and kind of the dominatrix look. So who better to send than Black Widow, right? So that's their whole deal, is they send her to America, to New York, where the headquarters of the Hellfire Club is. And she goes there and by the way, she can speak with a perfect American accent. She uses the American name of Natalie Rushman, and they're not going to turn her away, basically just based like on looks alone, right? So so she goes in, and of course, up until this point, she's thinking, "Oh yeah, I've totally got this. Nothing's gonna surprise me," so on and so forth. And so imagine her shock when she finds out there's only, well, I won't say that. At any rate, she meets the Red King is the point, right? And remember earlier when I said at the end of World War II there were a bunch of Reds because of the duplicator ray, right? So during the struggle with the evil leader of Germany, the duplicator ray was going off and creating multiple versions of Red. One of them is now the Red King of the Hellfire Club. And so she's shocked because, of course, she was married to one of the other Reds. So she's shocked to come face to face with this guy. And not only is she like emotionally compromised just based on that, but her orders are basically to seduce this guy, find out everything about him. Um, if he's a threat to the USSR, take him out, right? And so we revisit that concept again of the USSR is always taking stuff from her. So, for instance, if she sees this as a second chance, once again, they're taking it from her. And now, even worse is she's sort of the weapon, right? So on her end, she's not okay. And the other thing that you need to know about the Red King that I guess I forgot to mention until now, and again, he appears in multiple earlier videos. By all means, check out the earlier videos. But in the early 1950s, there was a game involving time travel, and to make a long story short, he has the Infinity Gems, which the Marvel movies refer to as the Infinity Stones. But he has them. He has 8 of them, actually. Normally, we only see 6, but the time travelers that came back in time also had a white gem and a black gem, as well as the normal colored gems. And so he's wearing each one of these on a ring. Um, so the only fingers that aren't wearing rings are his thumbs. So the point is I think it's the mind gem because, like, for instance, when he wears the ring that what is it called? Is it the strength gem or power gem? I can't remember now what they refer to it as. But it, like, Drax the Destroyer used to have that gem, and it raises the strength of the character that is coming into contact with it, right? So likewise, there's one that corresponds with the intelligence attribute. So sort of like no matter how good she is at acting or pretending, trying anyways to pretend that she's not disturbed, um, he knows she is, right? And so how do I want to put this? So they talk, and she's not in control of the situation, right? And the punchline to the whole thing, and this is really the sort of the climax of the game, is because this was not a beat 'em up game. This was not just a this character fights that character, which I like. I mean, don't get me wrong. That just wasn't this game. This was more of a talking kind of a thing, right? So they go back and forth, and he tells her stuff like, at one point, like during the fight with the leader of Germany, when the duplicator ray first went off, the Reds were all identical back then. right? So as they each started to live their own lives and have their own experiences, they each started to become individuals. So they aren't still all the same guy, right? I would compare it to twin brothers or something where maybe, if they were little or something, they could have been the same. But imagine if, say, one brother goes off to war and has a really awful time, and the other brother wins the lottery or something and is living the easy life. You know what I mean? If you separate them for, let's see, we're talking almost 20 years, I guess, and you bring them back together, there's going to be differences, right? They're not the same. So that's true of the Reds. The Red King is not the same guy as Superman Red, who's, not the same, as the next one in the list, so on and so forth. So, he kind of lets her know this. And he's trying to make her feel better. On her end, this is kind of helping her get back in the saddle a little bit in terms of like, okay, this isn't my husband who I miss horribly, who in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that awful long ago that the government I work for took him out, right? And she's sort of starting to get back into um sort of like her programming or whatever you want to call it. And he then is using, like, one of the things that the Infinity Gems allow the wearer to do is read minds. And so he is becoming aware of everything that's going on, of not only what her mission is and stuff like that, which he's just not that worried about. He doesn't think she can take him out. Oh, by the way, I left a part out. I'm so sorry. I just now realized. One of the members now of the Hellfire Club is the female Dr. Manhattan. I mentioned in an earlier video that something we do is we are sort of taking a lot of the characters that are really, really powerful and kind of unwieldy to a certain extent, and we're kind of putting them all in that group because um, that's sort of something the GM controls, and then I don't have any players doing anything that could be game imbalancing, right? But the point is, we mentioned in her first appearance, something was interfering with her ability to see the future, which goes against the grain of what Dr. Manhattan is normally about, right? Likewise, we've sort of hinted that he is having trouble with the future too. And so what we have said now at this point is when they meet, Red King and Dr. Manhattan, the thing is, if one of them has precognition and sees a future where it's like, well, I'll just do this and then this is how it goes, the other one's doing that too. And so they're constantly kind of contradicting each other's plans, which means whatever visions they have of the future don't come to pass. So, in other words, because something I hate in my game is the precognition power. I find it very difficult to run because the way it reads in the book is sort of like the GM tells you the future, but I have no idea what choices the players are going to make, right? So how do I tell them the future when I don't know the future out of game, right? So a lot of times when there's somebody with precognition of the game, I kind of go out of my way to find a way for that to not work because I find it to be a sort of unusable power, right? Because of my game stuff. But also it means things like, for instance, the what happens to JFK is right around the corner. Both of these characters could stop it from happening, but neither of them see it coming. You know what I mean? And so then likewise, the Red King did not see Black Widow coming. Her arrival is a complete surprise to him, despite the fact that he has the time gem. Okay. So here's the point. Because I feel like this video is like so long-winded. I'm sorry for that. Here's the punchline. He wants her to be happy. She's beautiful. She's a literal widow. So because he doesn't mess around with married women. She's not married anymore, right? And he's thinking that, she was kind of already into a version of him or whatever you want to say, however you want to word that. Because again, they're not the same anymore, but at one point they were, and that's the version she fell in love with. So at any rate, this is the big moment is he uses the Infinity Gauntlet. And the way we run the Infinity Gauntlet, by the way, well, excuse me, the Infinity Rings, sorry. Um, and thank you to my friend Vince who came up with the name Infinity Rings, by the way. Credit where credit is due. But at any rate, so he uses the Infinity Rings, and the way we run it is we treat it kind of like a genie, where the person using the Infinity Gems is basically making a wish. And so whoever's playing that character that week, they say what they wish for. And then the GM, and this is a classic thing in role-playing games, has to think about what are the consequences of that wish, or how specifically did you word the wish, right? And so the Red King wishes for her to be as happy as possible. And so there's at the gaming table, there's kind of a conversation happens out of game. And we agree that what actually is happening here is the Red King, without knowing it, because mind you, to be very clear, he's trying to do something nice for her. That's his motivation. But what is actually happening is her brain is getting hacked. And so your brain, anything at all that is fun or pleasurable produces dopamine, right? Let's say no matter what it is you have in life, whether it is riding a roller coaster, eating something that tastes good, um, being with the person you're in love with, um, whatever it is, right? Anything at all, your brain, it would have kind of, imagine like a volume knob that goes from, 0% to 100%. And the more fun a thing is, the higher the knob goes, right? And this is where, by the way, I had that conversation with John, who's the scientist that's studying brain chemistry and stuff. So, how do I want to put this? He mentioned certain drugs, for instance, that are very powerful drugs that exist in real life, right? But the thing is, as people invent new drugs that are supposedly better than the last drugs or whatever, what that kind of proves is that you're never going to have a drug that goes to 100. Does that make sense? Because you can people are always just coming up with the newer version of things. And the other stuff, by the way, no matter what it is, whatever kind of physical pleasure it is or emotional satisfaction or whatever we're talking about, right? Nothing naturally is ever going to hit 100%, right? But what we do in the game is we say, because it's the Infinity Gauntlet, so we've seen it do stuff like when Thanos wanted to wipe out half of all life in the entire universe or whatever, it did. Even if you just think about that in terms of range, infinite range, you know what I mean? Because the universe is infinite in size. So all that power now is coming down on a brain, and it's grabbing that volume knob, and in one instant, it goes from 0 to 100. Bam, right? Again, his motives are good. He wants her to be happy, but he's kind of saying, let me do this nice thing for you. Boom, be happy. And so she can't even stand, right? She just collapses where she's at. Her mouth opens, her eyes roll up in her head. And it's, mind you, looks like she's having a pretty good time. And this is another thing I talked to John about, is I said, so from Red's point of view, well, one thing John said is, in this really surprised me. He said it's actually impossible for her to be that happy and not hallucinate. That you can't have that much dopamine and not be seeing things. I was shocked by that, which, by the way, I feel like thematically this fits into the fact that we're in the 1960s, but at any rate. But I want to be careful how I word this because I don't want to be crass, but if you think of matters of love and physical affection and all that, right? This is beyond that. This dwarfs that. So if you think about a person's legs going weak and stuff like that, weak in the knees and all that, she would be screaming or moaning or however you want to put it. Um, she's never experienced anything. No human being has ever experienced anything like this, right? But so again, I consulted our resident scientist and was like, well, that's the later part. But the thing is, so then as soon as he stops and he holds her there up until the point it hurts, because that you can have too much of a good thing and it will hurt, right? And he doesn't want her to hurt, so he stops. And the thing John said was the instant he stops, she goes into detox. And I was like, really? Just from happiness? And he's like, oh yeah. Um, and so then I said, is it visually apparent to him that things are going wrong? And he's like, no, not at all. She just looks like she's having a good time. So that blew my mind that it could be that way. And he said that's how addiction works, is it kind of creeps up on you in a way, right? And you can be addicted to literally anything at all that's fun. And I just thought it was fascinating. But at any rate, so on his end, he feels like he's like, here, have some fun. And she obviously loves it. And she's kind of like, oh my God, what was that? And he's sort of like, oh, yeah, I have these basically magic rings that let me do whatever I want, basically. He he doesn't realize what he's actually doing to her. because now she would do anything to feel that way again. But because it's not readily apparent to him, right? He doesn't realize that what he's doing is actually bad. So he does it some more. He does it as much as she wants, right? And she no longer cares about the mission at all. What mission? Right? She has no idea. Well, I shouldn't say she doesn't know. She doesn't care who she worked for. You know what I mean? She's here now. She lives here now. And this is it, you know? And so we chose to leave it there because and we actually didn't even give this one an epilogue, which we hardly ever do. But I wanted to sort of let this one cool off. And I thought it was interesting because he's not a villain in the traditional sense of like, I'm gonna take over the world or whatever, you know. It's I guess it's more of kind of he's meddling with forces beyond his ken. Um, and these forces are infinite. So yeah, right? Like nobody's no I was gonna say human, he's not actually human, but you know what I mean. Nobody can wield infinite stuff and just be like, "Oh yeah, I got this." So I thought it was very interesting. And I feel like we often hear stuff in TV shows and stuff like that about power corrupts and infinite power corrupts and, or excuse me, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I feel like they don't usually spell it out or we don't usually see the process or anything, right? So I thought this was a big moment. Oh, I left a part out, which is then she's not the only one either. So he's doing it for like Dr. Manhattan and just whoever wants sort of another hit of of those infinity gems, you know. He's like, sure, I'm making people happy. This is great. You know, how as long as you like doing it, how could it possibly be wrong, you know? Um, yeah. I thought it was very interesting and I am very much looking forward to the next time we touch base with the Hellfire Club to see where they're at next time, you know. We ran this game this past weekend. We ran it on Sunday night. We won't play it again until next weekend. Um, so yeah, I'll be very curious. And then that gives me a week to kind of think through this and figure out sort of what are the repercussions and stuff like that. At any rate, I liked it. I hope that you liked it too. Um, if so, as always, please hit the like button. Make sure you're still subscribed because YouTube does unsubscribe people. We lost a bunch of subscribers at one point, and then they came back. They checked the thing, and we got them back, thankfully. Uh, ring the bell so you know when we upload more content, and leave a comment. Like I said before, let me know what you're into. Whether it's good or bad. If you give me feedback, that will probably make the channel more the way you want it to be, right? So that's it for us for this one from all of us at the longest running superhero RPG on Earth. We hope that all of you guys have a great week, and we will see you in the next video.